Missouri After School Network. This time, I'd like to introduce the Executive Director of the Missouri After School Network, Terry Folks, and also say we are very excited that we're celebrating 20 years as a state network. And so Terry has been leading the charge for a good part of that, not all of that. She's too young to have been leading it for 20 years, but we're really delighted that she is our leader. She's our executive director, and the work that is happening at the state level through the network and the supports that we get to give to programs. So Terry, take it away.
Thanks, Mark. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our 2022 CAPSA Symposium. We're very glad to see so many people here today to talk about career awareness, think about post-secondary access issues, learn from our experts that we brought in, etc. I'd like to thank Mark Hausert and Aaron Banks on our team and Brad Laudeman for pulling together this event, especially Mark on the content and the partnership side of bringing in some excellent speakers today. I'd also like to thank our task force members. We have a career awareness and post-secondary access task force. And in our afternoon plenary session, we'll have a slide that shows all of their names to recognize them all, but they've been instrumental in supporting Mark in brainstorming around speakers, giving referrals, and many of them even speaking today. So thank you to all of you who might be here also. I'd also like to recognize the Mott Foundation. The Charles Stewart Mott Foundation is one of our network's funders and has an opportunity grant related to career awareness and post-secondary access that we're fortunate to receive. And as a result, this symposium is brought to you at no cost. Everything has a price tag, and we thank the Mott Foundation for paying for this opportunity so that you are able to be here at no direct cost to you. We are one of 50 statewide after-school networks that work on issues of policy, partnership, and quality development as it relates to after-school programs. In the policy arena, that could be the big P of pursuing legislation, perhaps to fund after-school programs in more communities, or small Ps as it relates to departmental policies that impact after-school programs. On the partnership front, this CAPSA task force is a great example of the types of partnerships that we might engage in that bring school day, after-school, community-based partners, business partners, different thought leaders together around different issues. So we as a network have work in the career awareness space. We also have a special partnership grant as it relates to STEM education, and we'll have a similar STEM symposium in March. We also have an entrepreneurship initiative and are bringing together partners in a similar way to talk about entrepreneurship in the after-school space. And then on the quality front, we have a wide variety of services for after-school programs, either existing after-school programs that may have a 21st century or school-age community grant, and then prospective after-school programs. If there's districts interested in using their ESSER funding for after-school, we're here to support them through that process and help them to start up effective after-school programs. When you think about after-school, it's a really broad area. Some of you might be thinking, oh, my kindergartner went to an after-school program when they were 6 years old. Yes, that's part of after-school. You're going to be hearing today about middle school and high school after-school programs. There's a broad range of programs. We like to say that we have a foot in the childcare space, and we also have a foot in the education space, that while some after-school programs operate with that emphasis on meeting the family's needs during the 3 to 6 after school. We have other programs that are very much aligned with the school day and are helping to give extra time and space to making those connections for the learning that's taking place during the school day. So we have a whole continuum, and many programs do both and do both very, very well. As we think about this symposium, we have a couple goals, things that we hope to deliver throughout the day. First, there's the content. We have great speakers that are here to share. Last year, as Mark said, was our first symposium. We focused on some of the specific resources available in the state of Missouri, and those recordings are still available on our YouTube link or our YouTube site. So we encourage you to go and look at those. If there's a reference today and a speaker's like, well, last year I talked about, those are still available to you. This year, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the implementation of the career resources in the after school and school day space. So know that those initial sessions are still available to you, and we're building and continuing to build and plan even for next year already. We also wanted to bring school day educators and counselors and after school staff and CTE educators and college instructors together in one space, so that either through the chat or during breakout times that we can start to make connections. All of us are here to support youth and students as they grow and develop. And this is a unique opportunity with so many different professionals from different areas. Finally, we did want to spread awareness of after school. We want to highlight throughout the day the extra time and flexibility of space and the expertise that is available in the after school world to support and enhance the learning and the career exploration and the experiences that are taking place during the school day. As we think about supporting after school being a supportive space and providing that extra time and space, it's not just the academic learning that takes place after school. It's that opportunity to do hands-on projects, explore careers, prepare for their future endeavors. So we really encourage everyone to keep an open mind and to think creatively throughout the day about how we can come together and best support youth. I really hope that you enjoy the day today, and I'm going to hand it back to Mark, who is going to move us forward in our agenda.
Thank you so much, Terry. I am so delighted for the work that we get to do. We're privileged as a network, as a staff, to support the programs around the state and to do this kind of work, but also because of the funders like MOD. And so thank you very much, Terry, for those words and setting us up for a great day. Well, I am very, very delighted to introduce our keynote. And Terry talks about those partnerships, and we talk about MOD, and it's because of the relationships that we get to build across the country. One of the supports that we have received from the MOD Foundation as a part of the College Awareness and Post-Secondary Access Grant, they call it College Career Readiness, we call it CAPSA. But as a part of that, we have been working with the Michigan College Access Network as a TA provider, met some of their folks. And because of that relationship, I got a chance to meet this young lady today that's going to kick off our event. And so I'm really delighted to introduce this morning Najma Ahmed. Najma is committed to transforming generational trajectories by connecting education and economic pathways in cities and communities across America, creating stronger pathways to the future. Over a 14-year career in education and youth development, Najma has worked in K-12 and higher education, as well as through nonprofit organizations, making a growing impact nationally. Prior to her new role as founder and CEO of the Chisholm Group, Najma worked with the Council of Chief State School Officers as the Director of Career Readiness Initiatives, supporting state education agency leaders in this role. Najma provided targeted technical assistance and led states through intensive strategic planning, goal setting, and sustainability planning with the goal of ensuring that all students are career ready. Previously to that, she worked for the District of Columbia Public Schools and created and implemented critical career readiness programming, including the Career Ready Internship Program, which employed nearly 1,000 youth in paid internships connected to their career education program of study through partnerships with over 200 industry leaders, as well as the DCPS Career Bridge Program, which worked with seniors from underserved communities at risk of not graduating in a year-round mentoring career coach initiative. As I said, Najma is now the CEO and the founder of the Chisholm Group, a strategic consulting firm committed to connecting education and workforce sectors for real impact and systemic transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so delighted that we get the chance to hear from Najma Ahmed. Thank you, Najma.
Good morning. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm trying to figure out when I had time to do all of that. It feels like time has started to shift, especially in this past 2 years. A week is equivalent to a month is equivalent to a year. But thank you. It was good to remember the work that I've been able to accomplish. I'm so excited to be with you all this morning to really help you think through the how of it all. I know as Terry was speaking, and I really appreciate that context that you provided about how this year in this symposium is focusing on implementation, and that plays right into what I hope to offer to you all today. I know that these virtual keynotes can get a little painful, so hopefully this will be as painless as possible. I do not plan to speak at you all for 45 minutes. I hope that this will be an engaging exchange of ideas, thoughts, and opinions. But as we get started, and before I dive in, and Mark has already done this a little bit, but I wanted you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. I've been looking through to see who all is in there, just so I have an understanding of who is in the virtual space. But I'd ask you to go back into the chat and add in these last 2 bullet points that you see here on the screen. What brought you to the symposium today? And what do you hope to learn? And as much as that is for me to gain an appreciation of who you all are, and again, who's sharing the virtual space, it's much more intentional than that. The theme for my keynote today is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so you'll hear that refrain throughout this session this morning. But the first step in going far together is knowing who your, so to speak, coalition of the willing is. I call it a coalition of the willing. Who are those folks who are willing to do the work and to go far for students, no matter what barriers persist? So as you're seeing your colleagues and your peers' responses in the chat, really be intentional and see where there is some alignment and perhaps where there's an opportunity for further connections. You may also see an area where someone is hoping to learn more that you've been able to make great progress in and can share some resources. So again, in the chat, as I'm speaking, type into the chat what brought you to the symposium and what you hope, so we can start this intentional sharing in this intentional space here. Hopefully, I'm not sure, but to give you all more work that we can share the chat potentially later. And I definitely will send the slides to Mark so you can have access to what I share on the screen. This morning, we will examine together the challenges and opportunities before us in the career awareness and post-secondary readiness space, and think critically about how strategic partnerships can take us to new levels. Again, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Throughout my time with you all, I want us to engage with each other. So I know you're putting this in the chat now, but as I'm speaking, please feel free and encouraged to share any thoughts, opinions, feedback in real time as I'm speaking. I'll leave some time at the end for any additional questions, but I absolutely do not mind pausing for any clarification. I'm kind of monitoring a couple of screens, but I have the chat in the corner, so we can keep an eye on that. The educators multitask is real. So going ahead and jumping in, traditional discussions of gaps between apparent ability and real world needs, so-called achievement gaps, they've actually begun to yield to the reality that disenfranchised communities have faced critical opportunity gaps for far too long, and words matter. And so thinking about it through that lens, there's no such thing as an unskilled worker. However, many students do not have the access to the opportunity to gain the critical skills needed to obtain credentials leading to an in-demand career. So that's where the opportunity gap comes into play. When you're talking about achievement gaps and skills gaps, you're putting the onus on the young person. When you're talking about the opportunity gap, you're putting the onus where it belongs, back on the adults in the situation, to say, are we providing the opportunity and preparation for these young people in order for them to gain the skills that they need and to achieve? And so when we're thinking about how many students do not have opportunities to gain these credentials that they need, it's also important to understand, I know we talk about what's happening with the pandemic and what's happening in the world right now. It's important to understand that although COVID and the pandemic exacerbated the inequities, and as you all know, they existed long before the pandemic. And as I was preparing to speak with you all today, I wanted to focus in on what is happening specifically in Missouri as it relates to post-secondary transitions and opportunity. Like I said, with the pandemic, it has put us in a position where those students who already were lacking access to opportunity have been facing a more dire situation. And I don't necessarily want to be negative this morning, but I also believe in what I call radical honesty. And you cannot address or fix a problem if you're not comfortable in the discomfort of honesty and saying where there are gaps. And so I wanted to, like I said, talk about specifically what's happening in Missouri. And so pull up this slide here. I went through and was just looking at some data points that I thought would be helpful to present to you all. And so as of 2021, the four-year high school graduation rate in Missouri was at 89%, the overall graduation rate, which is actually pretty good. I led a summer graduation leaders institute last year with a few states across the nation, and they were working to get to and beyond 90%. So for you all to have an overall graduation rate of 89% is pretty solid. However, when we look at and begin to disaggregate the data, among Black students, the graduation rate was 78%. For English language learners, the graduation rate was 73%. Students with disabilities, 76%, and unhoused students, 75%. There's another data point, but as a statistic, I was watching the news a few weeks ago or reading an article, and it stuck with me now, is that 50% of the unhoused adults in this country, and we know that we have a national housing crisis due to a number of factors, including, and probably most importantly, a lack of economic opportunity. But currently, 50% of our national unhoused population is comprised of individuals who are in foster care as children. As you see on this data chart that I highlighted in orange, in Missouri, the graduation rate for students in foster care is at 69%. That's a 20% swing at the average, at the state average. As we know, in order to get to post-secondary opportunity, you first need to graduate. And these populations are facing widespread disparities in achieving that first step. Career awareness initiatives, increase student engagement. We see that in the data. We also see that career readiness initiatives allow students to apply what they're learning in the classroom and apply it to the real world. So it makes it more real. It makes students more likely to want to come to school. They give students a different way to think about school and a different way to feel about school. But I thought it was important to level set so that you all are aware of what is happening in the state right now, and where are those points that you should start to think about as far as targeting resources. And we'll get deeper into how exactly you do that. As the nation seeks to emerge from an economic downturn in the midst of a pandemic and a labor shift, strategic partnerships and collaboration between business and education sectors may prove to be the transformative solution that we're looking for. A solution not only to economic demands, but also a solution to systemic inequities in access to post-secondary education, training, and economic opportunity. For far too many young people in Black, brown, rural, low-income communities, these inequities have existed, frankly, for as long as formal education systems have existed in America. So we can conclude from that, from the data that we see, something is not working to the benefit of all students. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. For instance, we can see that in the way that we fund education in this country, or also in remaining siloed and resistant to new collaborative structures. Students' economic futures and ability to support their families, the development of a true talent pipeline for industry, the potential for continued innovation and creativity across all industry sectors, and ultimately the vitality and competitiveness of the United States economy in the global market are all at stake. At the start of the third decade of the 21st century, it is now common knowledge that young adults need much better preparation and skills to be ready for the nation's labor market. The efforts we make now, today, to scale up effective systems of student career preparation have the potential, and this is not hyperbole, but have the potential to lift a whole generation of students now in the K-12 space. Developing all students for post-secondary opportunity, regardless of their pathway. I know we talk about college and career readiness as if it's a bifurcated option. It does not have to be. What we're talking about essentially is post-secondary readiness. No matter a student's pathway, how are we making sure and working together that the students have the preparation that they need to be successful regardless of whatever pathway that they take. When we talk about preparing students for post-secondary opportunity, we also have to remember, and as Terry was talking about, these after-school spaces, these enrichment programs serve a dual or multiple purposes. Yes, we're talking about preparing students for post-secondary opportunity for the world of work, but beyond that, we're talking about preparing young people for life, and that includes empowering them with critical thinking skills. We know, unfortunately, that is lacking in some adults, and so as much as we can prepare young people with those critical thinking skills, the related knowledge and experience needed to be able to participate in our society, participate in our democracy, is something else that is a benefit when we work towards supporting students' post-secondary preparation and goals. And this work, again, as I mentioned before, can only be done when education, business, and government work intentionally to reimagine and rebuild the systems in which we prepare students for the future. And so as I was researching and seeing what the landscape looked like in Missouri, this is beginning to happen at the state level. And so pulling up this information. In 2011, the state of Missouri set a big goal, as it's called, for 60% of working age adults, 25 to 64 in Missouri, to have a certificate by 2025. And actually, I'm curious, and I put the question up here on the chat or on the slide, but if you can indicate in the chat with a yes or no, how many of you were aware of the goal, that this goal existed? If yes, just say yes in the chat. If no, you can say no in the chat. And if you were aware that this goal existed, how many of your organizations and agencies have strategic priorities actually linked to furthering this goal? So I see some yeses, which is great, but not aligned. I see some no's, that we weren't aware that this goal existed. And so you all can continue to chat about that. So it's good that some of you all do know, which I'm very happy about. But far too often these goals are set and then we don't have an intentional collaboration across sectors and organizations to get the work done, while ensuring diversity and voice and perspective. Sometimes these things live in a certain place with a certain agency, and you pull in people that you know and you work with those people, but you're leaving out the value to having other perspectives. We all come to this work, and I'll talk about this a bit more later, but we all come to this work with our own lens and our own perspective. And so the work that we do is only going to be that much more rich and that much more deep and that much more impactful for young people when we do it together, but we do it on purpose, not that we kind of just stumble into this work, that we actually meant to do it, right? And so that's something that you all can start to think about with this example. I think this is a great goal, and I think it's a wonderful starting point. And that's why I wanted to highlight it, or not even necessarily a starting point, but a point for you all to say, okay, we want to do this work. We have this goal in the state. How are we working towards that? And how could our programs and initiatives and the structure of what we're offering be more closely aligned to what this goal is, and what does that actually look like, and who are the people and the players that you can tap into in order to be a part of this work. And so as you can see in the infographic, like I said, some strides have been made, but in some increases across demographics, but I wanted to see an increase from what? Sometimes when we talk about data and, we talk about the 22.4% increase and in those numbers, which are important, but it's also important to establish a baseline and to understand where we are, so we can understand when we're talking about, if you want to go far, you have to go together. Well, how far is it that we need to go, right? And what does that course look like for us? And so on this next slide, still keeping with the challenge for now, don't worry, I'm going to get to the opportunity and the solution. I pulled up this chart and I was actually pretty surprised, maybe not surprised, but I think it's important for you all to look at. When you think about, this is what happens to the young people once they leave the K-12 space. And so this is data 2020 about students once they graduate, what is happening to them 6 years out. And this is specifically looking at public universities in Missouri. So of course, not all of the students, but I thought that it was a good snapshot to be able to look at what's going on there. And so you have the female learners who are graduating at the highest rate, but when you break that down, you see just how big of a disparity you have between African-American students to the highest rate of Asian and Pacific Islander student. And again, down to African-American males, and you see, the gulf between them. And so you have to start asking yourself, why are we okay with this? Why has this, and I know that we have the goals, but why have we not looked at this to say, something has to be done. There is clearly something that is not working. And we need to figure out how we can work together to be responsive to this and to increase these outcomes for young people. If we're going to reach that 60% credentialed goal in the state of Missouri, you cannot do that when you have 26.8%. You cannot do that in an equitable way, I would say. When you have 26.8% of African Americans, males, graduating within 6 years. You have to figure out a strategy to be able to be responsive and target resources in order to increase those outcomes for those students. And so, again, that means no longer doing what has always been done and expecting that different result. This means building that coalition of the willing that I mentioned before, to reimagine and redesign the way that we prepare young people for this future goal that we're looking at in 2025, which is not that far away. To create a seamless pipeline to the future of work, cross-sector teams should work together. And I know Terry said that you all have gotten some partnership funding, which is wonderful to be able to think about how do you build that cross-sector team? Who needs to be a part of it? It's really a question of, I sit down when I'm working on strategy with states or nonprofits, corporation, whoever wants to be a part of this work. And I literally ask them to start with the who, what, when, where, why, and how of it all. When you're talking about your cross-sector team, who needs to be a part of it, right? When do you want to implement it? That means that SMART goal, what that timeline looks like when you're working on it. So who, what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do it? That's why you use that data to say, okay, this is where the gaps are. And this is, what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it. And then the how do you all plan to work together? What does that look like? What does that structure look like for you all? Those are the questions that you should be asking yourself when you're thinking about setting up that cross-sector team, no matter where you work. I know folks are coming at this from all different places, from teachers to in-school administrators, to workforce boards, to nonprofit community-based organizations, but the questions remain the same. The who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so once you're thinking about bringing together those cross-sector teams and directing those funds to curriculum and standards alignment, post-secondary exploration, paid, I cannot emphasize enough, paid work-based learning opportunities like high school internships and post-secondary apprenticeships. And I know this sounds like a lot, and how are we going to pay for it? But I'll definitely talk about that. But and these all have to be prioritized by all levels of government, right? Once you start to get things codified in policy and legislation, that's when you start to be able to funnel resources. When we talk about city budgets, state budgets, school budgets, budgets are value statements. And if we're talking about student post-secondary readiness, that has to be at the top of the list of values. And so the cross-sector team and working together, one of the other benefits is developing that common understanding of what skills and credentials will be valued in this economy. As we're talking about in Missouri, wanting to get to that 60%, well, are we thinking about quality? Right? Are we thinking about the quality of credential? Are we thinking about making sure that these credentials are aligned to labor market needs, that employers care about the credentials? I know at some point in my work, we were working with a school and they wanted students to be certified in Microsoft Office. Wonderful, but is that a credential that is necessarily going to land them an in-demand job? No, it is not. That is a basic function that employers are looking for. So if you're going to do, certification in Microsoft Office for every single student, how can you couple that based on input from employers to say, this is what else is required or needed or sought after in this field, and making sure that you're being responsive to that, and then going back and implementing that, integrating it into your curriculum or into your work or initiatives. So I wanted to lay out what's going on in the situation for you all, and just being mindful of the time as well. I wanted to get into the opportunity of it all. And so just quickly, I wanted to, from my perspective, what's happening across the country, to offer that to you all. So there's active engagement in this work. And so about 40 states now have incorporated some aspect of career readiness into their ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, their ESSA accountability systems. We know what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. And so thinking about in your state, what does that look like? What are these career readiness accountability measures? And again, is it something that is aligned with your work? So knowing what's happening at the state level, how are we saying students are ready for post-secondary? And are you working towards that in a concerted way? All states are addressing flexibilities offered. We had Perkins reauthorization, about 2 years ago now. And so a lot of states were able to combine their Perkins plans with their WIOA plans, which is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, to make sure that what's happening in the workforce space is complementing what is happening in the K-12 space. So I would encourage you all to also look at your state Perkins plan and WIOA plan, to understand what are the resources, what are the opportunities that are available for us. Sometimes we get discouraged because we have to figure out how to pay for these things, but there is an opportunity to really blend and braid this funding to maximize impact. And now there's a push nationally for WIOA reauthorization, which will allow for another level to systemic change. One of the things that I'm actually looking at is how can that WIOA funding, right now you have to use 75% on disconnected youth and 25% on young people who are in school. Disconnected youth are young people who are not in school, who are not working. How about we look at the resources and see how we can direct them to stop young people from becoming disconnected in the first place? When you think about those young people in foster care, I'm sure that they could use more resources targeted to them. And WIOA could be a pot that we could think about redirecting those funds. So it's about being creative and not getting bogged down about what's always been, and having that coalition behind you that you can push this forward, or next to you rather. There's also widespread support for the development of student-centered, personalized college and career planning efforts. In about 30 states, legislation has been passed to require local education agencies to implement these student-centered personalized plans that every student has to walk away with a plan. And many states, of course, are supporting that voluntary adoption, but understanding what's happening in Missouri, what is the requirement for post-secondary plans for young people in Missouri, and how can your after-school program, how can your nonprofit, how can your school, again, work and direct your efforts towards those post-secondary planning goals. And then just a little bit more on what's happening across the country. The notion of a well-rounded education, which is now, and that's an actual term, but the notion of a well-rounded education is now embedded in the ESSA Title IV Part A. It gives states, districts, and schools discretion in how to support that well-rounded education in your Title I and Title IV plans. And so ESSA enables states to deploy federal resources in new ways for college and career readiness practices. And a lot of people don't know that this is a possibility. And so this includes for CTE, career and technical education, for work-based learning, as elements of that quote unquote well-rounded, education. And this isn't, while this is encouraging and shows the opportunity is there, it often leads to what I call random acts of career readiness. And so it's, you have all of these pieces and these components there, but there's still not a coherent strategy of how solutions will be generated, how resources will be allocated. When we think about the instance of across states, the governor's COVID-19 education relief funds, many states either rushed through those plans and didn't take the opportunity to be collaborative, or many states have not even begun to think intentionally about how they can allocate those funds to close the gaps that were systemically created, if we're being honest, through various levels of community disinvestment. And so in these uncertain times, I want to still encourage you all that we have a window to act. And as I mentioned before, everyone seems acutely aware right now that we have a problem when it comes to making sure all young people are prepared for the world once they leave the K-12 space. The question becomes, what are we prepared to do about it, right? And so one of the solutions or strategies that I want to offer you and looking at time, so I'm going to adjust a bit. I was going to have you do breakout sessions, but I'm not, but I'm still going to go over the content for you all because I want to make sure that you have it. But one of the most important things in doing this work, you have to be able to ask the right questions. Anytime I'm working with an organization, a client, we start off with asking the right questions. In order to do that, you must use data to drive the conversation. You have to be able to analyze, see what's happening, and then ask the right questions based on that. Also, many times this work fails. This is really important because policymakers come at it from a paternalistic view of knowing what's best instead of asking the people, asking the students, asking the parents, asking the families, community groups, businesses, what are the barriers that you're experiencing and what resources would be helpful? It's as simple as asking people, what do they need, and figuring out how to get it to them. That's a piece of the data as well. There's no need to guess when you can access qualitative and quantitative data to help you to drive your work forward. This is how you truly generate community-based solutions. We know that, not to get political, but we know that trickle down doesn't work. Google it, just trickle down is not a thing. And so we want to have a strong foundation where we can highlight communities knowing what they need and then just scale those solutions and making sure that they are at the center. It's a quote, those that are closest to the pain need to be closest to the power. And so as you're building your coalitions, as you're building this work, it's critical to remember that. So let me hop into this to make sure that I give us a little bit of time on it. And again, I will share these slides because I really, really want you to have these resources and access to them. The model that I use is called targeted universalism. Targeted universalism means setting ambitious goals to prepare all students for the future, but beginning with those historically locked out of opportunity. So we talked about what's happening in Missouri right now in the graduation. Your universal goal is, let's talk about the big goal, right? The universal goal is to get 60% of folks in Missouri with some type of credential by 2025. That is the universal goal, wonderful, admirable goal. The targeted part comes in, how do you do that? And that is by disaggregating the data, seeing where the gaps are, and then targeting your resources and initiatives to that group. When you target those who have been historically left behind, you lift outcomes for everyone. That is the benefit of targeted universalism. And this can and should be done at both the macro and at the micro level. And what that means at the macro level is local statewide policy, right? That's that overarching umbrella where you can implement targeted universalism. At the micro level, that's happening from your vantage point of where you sit and what you can control directly. This gets overwhelming sometimes, right? So we have to remind ourselves, I'm not going to fix education by 11 a.m. today, right? But what I can do is to share some resources with you all, and it's going to get me a little bit closer to that goal, right? And so whether you're in a school, a business, or nonprofit workforce board, this targeted universalism strategy is definitely one that you can deploy to help you think about. And then it also helps you. I worked with the state of Oklahoma, and again, I believe in radical honesty. The state passed legislation around bringing up the boogie word, but critical race theory, right? And so they wanted to implement new policies around equity, but they were afraid that they would get pushback on just saying equity. And so 2 years ago, everyone was all into equity. Now it's kind of a minefield. But I worked with Oklahoma to really think about, when you pose your goals with this targeted universalism framing, I dare someone to argue with you when you say you want 100% of kids to graduate from high school, right? Nobody's going to argue with that. The targeted part is how you get there, but you set that universal goal. This is for everyone. We want this to support and to give increased access to everyone. Just the way that we're going to do it is by targeting those who have been historically left behind. So this is a way to kind of cut through the politics of it all and get at the heart of the matter of increasing opportunities for young people. So I won't necessarily go into that. I'm sorry that didn't necessarily have enough time, but these are questions for you to think about, right? If you're thinking about it in the macro or micro level at the, right here, these questions here. So when you get the slides, really think about this. Like pick a goal or a challenge that you're having and actually walk through this and think about it. It could be, if you're a teacher, wanting to increase, grades for a certain population, whatever it may be. Definitely use that as an ongoing tool to help you as you're doing this work. Another thing I wanted to just offer to you all is really having an understanding of what does post-secondary career ready actually mean. For me, it looks like students who have the opportunity to explore their strengths, interests through academic and work-based learning. Upon graduation, they're able to articulate and formalize that plan, but also to implement it, right? The implementation is critical. A student can have a plan, and not to get religious, but as we know, faith without works is dead. And so plan all day, but if you're not able to actually work that plan, it doesn't matter. And so this can be daunting as well with teachers and counselors being pulled in so many different directions. But in addition to directing resources to after school networks like this one for out of school time learning, this is something that could be happening in the core classes. You'll hear from an organization later, I think they may be in here now, but NAV has a brilliant model that's been successful around the country. And also here in Missouri, or there in Missouri, I feel like I'm there with you all, but here in Missouri at integrating post-secondary readiness in the core academic curriculum. So it's not just an aside or an additional burdensome initiative for teachers and administrators. It's a tool to enhance what students are learning. So really thinking about that integrated learning piece. Kind of speeding through a little bit. We're wrapping at 11, I think, right? Okay. So I also, and I won't go too deep in this, again, I want to leave you with something. This is another resource to really think about what's happening in other states. As you're going far together, that also means going far together with other states. True equity means I can live in Ohio, I can live in DC, I can live in Missouri, and I'm going to have access to similar opportunities. And so this resource with Education and Commissions of the State, it's a 50-state crosswalk to really see what's happening in each of the states. What are some creative things that you can take away, how they're using funding, how they're really bridging the gap between education and workforce. The second tool, this is a link as well, This is looking at the second one is looking at how you're connecting the systems. This link here is how are you connecting the funding to pay for it. And so definitely look through that to be able to provide you with some ideas and creative learning thoughts. As we are wrapping up, I wanted to leave you with something like to take away and to think about. I would say for me, the key solution to these large scale challenges is remembering the humanity of it all. Oftentimes we get caught up in the data and the policies that we forget these are human beings we're discussing. And we're also human beings, and we bring our own stuff to the work as well as our own journeys through our own careers. And we're trying to figure out, what do students need? Well, what did you need? You were once a little person as well. You were once a student as well. And so this is just a mental poll for you to take, but think about how you got to where you are today and answer those questions for yourself, right? What did you want to be? I wanted to be a doctor. I'm not a doctor. I'm not currently working in that field. A bit of my own story, originally from Dayton, Ohio. I'm the first in my generation to go to college. Both of my grandmothers graduated from college, a nurse and one was a teacher, but I was the first after them. Ironically, I'm the youngest of 6, and all of my siblings have now gone back to get their degree, and some with a master's. I think little sister showing them up was not something they were into, but I went to majority white schools up until high school. Sometimes my mother worked 3 jobs to ensure that my siblings and I could live in a neighborhood that would allow us to have the best access to high quality education. I didn't have words for it as a child, but I knew it was unfair. I had cousins and friends who lived a few miles down the road and had a radically different educational experience available to them. However, when I was preparing for graduation, I went to those great schools, but it was the after school programs like Upward Bound and other initiatives that took me on college tours and helped me with applications and understanding the process. And I still felt a huge adjustment going off to a selective private university, Xavier, go Muskies, and from failing to understand the implications of financial aid, which is still haunting me 20 years later, and not feeling like I had a strong as an academic foundation as some of my peers, but I was still miles ahead of so many young people who deserve the same opportunity that I got. And as an adult doing the work now, I just see how critical my own experience has been to the way that I do this work. It's made it my mission that no kid will have to rely on the luck of being born in a certain zip code or the Herculean efforts of a determined mother to have a real shot at opportunity. And so think about your own story and the questions that I posed here. And whether your story is similar to mine or different in any way, you have to make it your mission that either no child has to experience what you went through or do everything that you can to make sure that every single young person has the same opportunities you did, and align yourself with co-conspirators who will do the same. This is how you form your coalition of the willing and go far together. So thank you all this morning. I'm sorry I had to zoom through a little bit of that, but hopefully you were able to take something away with you that you can think about for the rest of the day and as you move forward with your work.
Najma, thank you. Can everyone give Najma a great round of virtual applause? All right, giving you the snaps now, Najma. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And also, I told Najma when I visited with her, this is just the first of other visits that we're going to have and other opportunities I know that we'll get to work together. And so Najma, thank you so much. We look forward to getting the slides, and we'll get those out when the recording is ready. And again, we are so delighted that we've had the privilege and the pleasure to have you kick off our symposium today. Thank you so much. We want you to be aware that there's an evaluation survey that's going to be in the chat box. Please fill that out for us. We sure appreciate if you would do that. Also, we have 3 breakout sessions. They're going to start at 10:15. I want to give you a quick overview of those. Najma mentioned our friends from NAF, and so that's one of the sessions at 10:15. That the title of that session is Building Our Future Workforce with Talent in Our High Schools. Tiffany Barfield from NAF, as well as Colleen Gillis. And I think I said that I didn't get a chance to meet Colleen yet. I don't know if it's a hard G or soft G, but Colleen is in the St. Louis region with NAF and working with the academies there. And I know she works with at least a couple of the schools that have 21st century grants, and one of our other schools that has a SAC grant with Jennings, Normandy, and U City. Our second breakout is MIMO, assisting Missouri students to plan, prepare, and save for post-secondary opportunities. And that's Alex Miller from the Missouri Scholarship and Loan Foundation. And our third breakout at 10:15 is Access Opportunities to Earn and Learn with Apprenticeship, Missouri Virtual Learning Platforms. And Jenna Caldwell from the Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development will be leading that session. So you can get those the links to those sessions in the link that was sent to you, and you can make sure that you can be a part of those. And so again, we are glad that you were able to be with us today, and feel free to head to those breakouts. Also, as I mentioned, we have a lunch and learn session with 220 leadership from 11:40 to 12:10, and then we'll have another general session at 12:15 before we have our last sessions in the afternoon. Again, thank you so much. Hit that evaluation and take a quick break. You could also go to the virtual hallway and hang out for a little bit. Anything else we need to add, Terry or Brad, before we end this session? All right. Thank you again, Najma. We look forward to visiting with you again soon. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you in a breakout session real soon.